Good evening, and welcome to our fourth in our DSB digital series. And on this evening's panel discussion, we're going to be discussing the learning of languages, the learning of second languages and additional languages. I am going to keep my introduction very, very brief because I think one of the positive things about our panel discussions is we try and keep them within a fixed time scale because we do appreciate that people are very busy, and we are very, very appreciative that so many people have come to join us this evening to take part in this discussion. I would like to introduce the panelists, our distinguished panelists. Can I start with Helsvin Brockmeyer, who is our leading IBDP German teacher at DSB International School. Helsvin obviously is German, but has lived in India many, many years and also speaks Gujarati and Hindi. And so, good evening, Helsvin. Thank you very much for taking part. I'd then like to introduce Nita Lutria-Rowe. She teaches at BIS, just across the road from where we used to be. And she was formerly a Spanish teacher there, and now she is responsible for the primary years program. And I think it's really good that we have primary teachers with us because learning languages certainly should start early, and in this country for many people does. Then I'd like to introduce you to Maria Kurkova, who is our German specialist in the primary section at Garden Campus, and she also comes up to teach our oldest primary children at our Euro campus as well. And Maria is Russian and German and speaks beautiful English as well, and is also pretty good at Hindi, so a true polyglot. Then I'd like to introduce you to, so good evening, Maria, and thank you very much for taking part. I would then like to introduce you to Varsha Agrawal-Rodewald. Varsha is a former parent of DSB, but more importantly, is the IBDP coordinator at Ascend School. And Varsha has also been involved in other of our digital, DSB Digital Plus panel discussions. Varsha is joining us tonight, both in her role as an IBDP coordinator, but also, of course, as somebody who was for a very long time a Hindi teacher as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, is our head of secondary, Camille Gauthier. Camille is a French teacher. Camille is also the head of secondary and the IBDP coordinator at DSB International School. And I believe in a previous slide also taught some German as a second language as well. And Camille speaks beautiful English, so clearly she's learned some of that along the way as well. So with no further ado, I would like to hand over to Camille, who is going to moderate this panel discussion. And once again, I would just like to thank you all for giving up some of your time this evening to come and join us. And we look forward to your questions, some of which we hopefully will be able to manage and answer at the end of this meeting. But any that we fail to answer, we're always very happy to take emails and answer them at a later date. So thank you very much. Camille, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Howard, for the introduction. A webinar on language learning, I thought I would start with perhaps stating the obvious and discussing the benefits of learning languages. Why do we learn languages? Well, obviously, a lot of research suggests that it improves cognitive skills, memory, problem-solving skills, etc. That was probably true of maths and science and history. So why is it so important to learn languages? Well, learning a language has benefits to you as a person functioning within a society. It helps develop better communication skills and helps you interact with people in their own language, which is incredibly important. It also develops better cultural sensitivity and helps you as an individual navigate relationships across cultures, which in a world like ours is a skill that will take you very far. It also gives you better knowledge and understanding of your own language, perhaps something that we don't really think about when we think about learning another language. We don't think about our own language, and yet I feel that the journey into language learning is also a journey into yourself. I would like then to first start with the first question. Is it better to start learning a language early? And I'd like to ask Maria, what do you think? Is it important to start early? Obviously, as a primary school teacher, you'll have a strong opinion about this.
Well, there are definitely certain assumptions which come along with this question. For example, how many times have you heard people say things like, children are so much better at language learning than adults? I wish I had a go at languages much earlier. I cannot remember anything now. Or children are like sponges, they just soak up languages. So everything, all of the three statements I used to hear myself, for example, from people. And although these are common assumptions that children are better at language learning, I think perhaps we need to look at it a little bit differently. I would absolutely agree that younger learners are often more willing to take risks, and that is a key part of being a language learner, taking risks. Children can be more resilient, and they frequently seem to be more authentically and intrinsically motivated to learn everything, including languages. But I think older learners and adults can also be very successful language learners. They just have different starting points. Cognitively, for example, in terms of their experience of language and learning and motivation, and etc. So an important aspect to consider when we as educators teach a foreign language to children is how to leverage this difference to provide more engaging and meaningful learning opportunities to younger learners, to provide them with more agency in the process of learning and using a foreign language. And I believe, and it's actually proven that children are natural inquirers, and we just need to give them more tools and introduce them to more independence in classrooms. And it concerns actually all the subjects, including languages. And adults are more aware of their goals. They know why they decide to learn a language. So these are two different starting points, and we cannot really say that one is better than another.
Thank you, Maria. And I think leading on from this, Nita, I believe you were actually a late bloomer in the language learning process. So could you let us know how your experience influences this question about how early is it should we start learning languages?
So conversely, though I advocate learning languages very early, personally, my personal experience tells me otherwise. Um, I, of course, being an Indian, as we all discussed before, that, one does learn certain languages as one is growing up. So one did have, I did have a working knowledge of Hindi and Marathi, but even my Hindi, I learned to speak Hindi better when I was much older because uh, I was, in fact, in my teens when I took a great deal of interest in Urdu, because at that time there were a lot of Pakistani serials that were very, very popular, and the language just interested me so much that I realized that I was missing out on this wealth of language that I'd never been exposed to. So I started learning Urdu consciously, and because I was learning Arabic at the time, I was in Iraq. I could read the script as well, so it helped me a lot. And I had a lot of friends who spoke Spanish. I was, again, as I said, in my teens, and I just loved the sound of the Spanish language and decided that I wanted to learn it. So today, I took what is fashionably known as a gap year way back then to learn languages. So I was learning Arabic, Spanish, and French at the same time as a near adult. I was about 18, yeah.
And you made a career out of it. That's very inspirational. Varsha, what's your point of view as a person who's perhaps involved with older students, so perhaps students of the age of Nita when she embarked on her language learning journey?
I think in addition to what Maria and Nita, what they've already said, what I want to highlight is that there is never really, like that right age to learn a language. You can learn a language at any point of time. Of course, I would say babies born in families where multiple languages are spoken have a clear advantage. And, you cannot compare language learning to that immersive environment, but that doesn't mean that it's too late. Also speaking, from the DP perspective, and of course, we are running a program now where students are choosing between different languages. I don't think they are just doing it for the sake of it. They are actually planning their careers and, wanting to invest that time and energy into choosing a language that they think is going to give them more exposure or more access to a culture that they are probably going to study in. So I think it's very, very intentional. And also just wanting to mention, the difference between the right, when we talk of the right age, I just feel that we are more forgiving of children, and that's why they are all open to making their mistakes, and and we think they are learning faster. And where adults are concerned, they are more reserved, they are more conscious of their environment when they are speaking a language, and they have reference languages by then. So they're always trying to compare, one language that they're learning now to something that they already know. So it seems like, the process is more stretched, but it doesn't have to be. And again, speaking from my own experience, very much like Neeta, I started learning German at the age of 24. And that's all I wanted to do. And why I chose German, it's just because too many people was learning French around me. So I said, I want to do something different. And within a span of 9 months, I was all the way from, those who know the CFR scales from A1 to C2, because I wasn't doing anything else. That was my life. So it was like intensive German, 5 hours a day for, 9 months of my life. So it's all possible. It's what you want to, put in. Also, a few other points I had was, intrinsic motivation. There's also a need. Some people just need to. I know that a lot of our high school students are wanting to study in Germany. So, they want to learn an additional language. So they have that motivation even at that age, when they are about 15 or 16. And also the location. If you're fortunate to be able to travel and live in a place where, you can gather the language and, of course, the whole culture piece that comes with it, then there's no stopping you at any age.
Thank you, Varsha. So I'm going to ask this question to Maria first. Do you think that pedagogical approaches should be different according to the age of the learners?
Yeah, well, I thought a lot about this question, to be honest, myself. And I actually thought of 3 different aspects that we should look at while trying to decide whether the pedagogical approach should be different or not. And these 3 key points are, first of all, the cognitive abilities and cognitive capacities, I should say, for language learning of students, then their language learning motivation and engagement in the classroom. So, and these 3 things, there's 3 key aspects, they will differ according to the age of students. So if, for example, if we look at cognitive capacities, right, middle childhood is considered to be a very active phase of cognitive development in children. And while children still seek approval from adults and from peers, and they enjoy fun and varied activities, they are increasingly capable of concentration and sustained attention. So that's when we can involve more structured explanation, and that's when explicit grammar explanation can be already introduced, right? And though they are more autonomous learners at this age already, they are not exactly fully autonomous learners, right? So, and hence out of class learning is limited. And indeed, levels of attainment reached by primary school learners are directly related to the amount of timetabled lessons that they get and the quality of foreign language input provided for them in their language learning classes. So in this aspect, if you look at cognitive capacities, they are connected to the pedagogical, they are connected to the age of students, and hence you have to decide what is the best pedagogical approach. Here also, if we look, for example, at upper primary, grade 4 and grade 5, they have well-developed first language skills, right? And first language skills, they support the development of language skills when acquiring a foreign language. So, for example, children's, when we talk about developing literacy or phonics, it can all go hand in hand with developing the same skills in foreign language. So, thus, if we look at it in general, definitely I would say that a different pedagogical approach is required based on the age.
Thank you, Maria. Helsvin, as a secondary teacher, what's your perspective on this?
Sorry, as a secondary teacher, but
Hi, sorry, I think I went.
That's okay. I also taught children from 3 years old up to adults more than 70 years old, so I've got a really big range of students. And one thing that I would like to add to what Maria said is when children learn when they are really young, like 3 years old or 4 years old, they still learn much more a foreign language like they learned their mother tongue, by imitation, by listening to what people say. And so therefore also your pedagogical style will be very different. I mean, you will play a lot of games with them, you will sing songs with them, you will act out things, you will have a cuddly toy and do role plays with them. So that will be different. Then obviously during secondary, their cognitivity levels are still increasing each year. Their maturity will increase greatly. The depth of what they can actually talk about even in their mother tongue will still increase. So accordingly, you vary your approach to the lessons and to their learning. So the text will be different. In IB, for example, you will read proper original text from newspapers, or you will listen to podcasts, original podcasts. You will actually interview people, maybe like in our school, we have German people, they can actually interview real German people. So that will be very different. The independence will be different as well. So you can expect children or students at that age a little more to think about their goals and think about how they would like to learn something and what they would like to do. So that is different. Having some things that stay the same, which I have realized, even 70-year-olds still like to play games, for example. So you can continue playing games. Obviously, you would vary the games according to the level of grammar structures, the level of interests, the level of topics that you have. But I remember my IB students, like 2 years ago, they begged me for a ball throwing game. Like I throw the ball, I ask a question, they throw the ball to another one, answer, or you make two like connected sentences, you connect sentences with a connector. So there's so many ways of doing things like that everybody enjoys. You just have to vary the level of what you do. But of course, one goal in language learning is always, or not one goal, one way of achieving language learning is that students have fun, and playing games is always a good way of having fun. And there's so many games you can play. Antakshari in India is a big thing, so you can do that all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Nita, in your opinion, how important is the role of the teacher in this process of successful language learning?
Taking off from what Helsman said about, the first place where we learn languages is within our own homes, with our families. And why is that? Because they're not consciously teaching us. They're not constantly correcting us and telling us, no, you use bad grammar here. So, if the teacher provides that same sort of warm, supportive environment where making mistakes is not a problem, making mistakes is just viewed as a way of learning, and you encourage the child to develop the confidence and the just the desire to use that language without being constantly corrected or told that they have to do better. I think that's where the teacher really plays a very, very important role. And also design, as again, to take on what Helsman was saying about designing experiences that really appeal to them. Coming down to their level and trying to think of how would I have liked to learn this language at their age. I wouldn't like to open a grammar book and solve worksheets. That's not how anyone learns languages.
And yet, that is how a lot of people learn languages, but probably badly. The word worksheet actually makes the hair on my arms stand up. All right. I'm going to ask Helsvin this question. How do we make sure that language learning is accessible to all learners?
Yes, of course, as we already said, the cognitivity levels change during ages, but also you will have in each class children or students who are very different from each other. They have a different history of their language learning. They have different mother tongues. They have different abilities, different challenges, different learning styles. So you have to always look at how do I make this valuable for all of them and challenging enough for everybody that everybody really makes progress. And you achieve this hopefully by first of all really knowing where your students are. You have to assess really where do they stand, what are their strengths, what are their challenges, how do they like to learn. Once you know all of that, then you differentiate or you change your approach to how you teach them. And I would always try and make like a goal sheet for each student to know, okay, what is your next step? What is your next step? And from there, go on and then vary the level from you vary your expectations, you vary the depth and the complexity of what you achieve or what you want them to achieve. And this starts from your language, how you speak to them, how you ask them questions. I mean, I can speak to one student in a very simple way with very simple words and to another student with very complex sentences and very nuanced vocabulary. And it goes to the way of resources that you use, the methods that you use, the support that you give. So, for example, you can always keep the same topic, even in a class with many different levels. And say, for example, in the topic hobbies, one student will just be able to say or understand a simple sentence of, okay, my hobby is football. And another student will be able to add adjectives or give reasons. And another student will be maybe go way deeper and explore the hobby in depth and give reasons and advantages, disadvantages of that hobby, or why a hobby is good at all. I mean, why do we need hobbies? So you can go in great depth, or you can be on a very simple level in the same lesson, hopefully.
Yeah, I think the issue of differentiation in the language class, I mean, differentiation is an issue in all subjects, but in language, I think it's particularly important. When I sat through 4 years of secondary school, I was fluent in English, and I was sat through learning how to say my name and colors and rooms of the house. And, you know, my needs as a learner were not fulfilled. So I think it's very important. Varsha, what's your take on this? Varsha, you're on mute.
Before I respond to your question, Camille, I just wanted to say that we've switched from saying worksheets to task sheets, and then that makes a lot of difference. You know, worksheets comes with this scary connotation and children dislike that. And this has helped. So try that. Okay, and in response to your question now, Helswin mentioned something, you know, that knowing where your students are is very, very important. And I want to talk about knowing who your students are is also very, very important. And just speaking from my own experiences, I think just knowing my students well, what motivates them, what they like to talk about, where they like to travel to, what kind of songs they listen to. I think it is a teacher's responsibility to get to know the student, especially in the language classroom, because it's the whole sociolinguistics that's come into play. You know, what is your family all about? What different cultures are represented in your family? And I take all of that and try to weave that into my learning experiences. And when you bring that to the classroom, then they connect really, really well. And it also becomes relevant. It's not like, you know, you're just picking up some literature and using that in the class. They really, really connect well with all of that. The way I've done this, and I think I just wanted to add some tips for teachers. It takes a while till you get to know the student, but a lot of your learning experience is designed at the beginning of the year. So we sit down and kind of make a language profile, and you can do it in so many creative ways. You know, now digitally, you can do it on Mural, you can just do a painting, you can do sketches, and through that, you're getting to know the student, you know, kind of weave in all those different components. You can do thinking routines. There are many, many ways of doing that. And also revisiting that. So in the the entire language learning journey, you start with that language profile and you revisit that at the end of that year, or maybe at the beginning of their next year. And what has changed? What can they add? Because it is, I teach the middle years and of course also the high school students, and especially then a lot is changing in their lives, the way they think, the way they perceive. So kind of, touching upon that and including all of that and keeping that in mind while design teaching and learning can go a very long way. So knowing just who your students are.
Thank you, Varsha. Beautifully put. Maria, in the primary language class, how do you meet the needs of your learners?
Well, cannot agree more with Varsha and Helswind to what they were saying previously. Knowing who your students are and where they are at applies to primary as well. Besides that, I would also like to mention the 3 principles that have always helped me to plan and cater for different levels within one class. So principle number 1 would be that young children benefit from different kinds of teaching and learning activities as they progress through primary education. And here we talk about creating rich learning environment, providing different inputs, audio, visual, supporting materials, a sense of challenge, having a good percent of implicit learning in your classroom when students don't really think of the process of learning as such. For example, learning through play is one of the implicit learning things, yeah. And then principle number 2 would be that pedagogy for younger learners should transit from the emphasis on fun activities and repetition to more structured and reflective opportunities for learning. And that is again a reference to cognitive capacities and taking them into consideration while planning lessons. And principle number 3, which is an important one, is a sense of progression and achievement becomes increasingly important in upper primary classrooms, and not only upper primary, I would say throughout primary. Being able to notice that today I know more, I can do more, I can say more in foreign language than yesterday or a week ago. And that supports learners' confidence and their sense of efficacy, as well as emotional engagement. So these 3 principles have always helped me to plan productively and cater for different levels in the class.
Thank you, Maria. And I think one of the big questions that I often get asked is, should students with additional learning needs be in the language classroom? As an educator and as a school leader, I get this question very regularly, and we very often have students who join us having been diagnosed with learning difficulties, coming with a psychoeducational report that invariably says this child should be exempt from learning a foreign language. And this makes me, frankly, quite angry. Just to share with you a live example, we had 3 or 4 years ago, we had a young gentleman join us in the IBDP in grade 11. He came with a report that said he shouldn't do a language. Now, with the IB, there is no choice. You have to do a second language. So this was never a discussion. He was top of the batch. Well, he's top of the batch in the entire DP, but also in the French ab initio course that he had taken. And this child had been told by a psychologist that he shouldn't be doing a language because this would be detrimental to his learning. And so whilst I appreciate that in some cases students may have barriers and perhaps they would be better off working on their own language or their spelling or their maths, I feel that the language class is actually is a place for those students with additional learning needs. And I feel that exempting them from learning a language is frankly quite unfair. So this was just something that I thought I'd share. And so continuing on from this, Varsha, what do you feel are the barriers to language learning that exist for learners?
So Camille, this is the only question that I actually drew a list for. It's pretty long, so I'm going to try and keep it short and concise. But yeah, just, they are my own experiences from my own journey as a language teacher. And I think this race for learning a language, and I think Neeta has already mentioned that just being able to or wanting to reach from A to Z in no time. Language learning is a journey. And I think more than the students' parents need to realize that, because they are also stakeholders, in this growth of the students. So we need to understand that it needs to go slow and it shouldn't be marks driven. I think that's the one piece that I'm not very happy about where the DP is concerned, because why do you never learn a language really for marks? And if we could just keep the marks out, then it would be a very, very rewarding and I think meaningful journey. Also, the focus has changed today, and if there are schools or teachers still thinking that it's about, just memorizing a poem and regurgitating that, that's not learning a language. But the focus needs to shift on communicative competence. We all want to be out there. We want to be able to communicate, to be able to talk and, exchange ideas. And that's the purpose of communication. So it's all right to mix languages. You don't have to speak, especially from the Hindi teacher perspective, I don't have to pick out words from an old literature text and then be able to use that. It's about this day-to-day communication, and that's what the focus should be on. Also, one of the biggest barriers, and this is from an Indian perspective, coming from an Indian parent, from an Indian teacher in an international context, is this insisting on English. From when a child in India is born in a Hindi speaking or any other regional language environment, parents insist that they speak English, because otherwise, how will you get admission? What will people think of you? You need to go into your school interaction. So that kind of starts then, where you're kind of Hindi becomes low status and English is always, that language you aspire to speak well. There's actually a very interesting TED talk called Don't Insist on English. So if you have the time, please do watch that. Also, I think realistic expectations from parents and teachers, because I think parents, have studied, for example, Hindi in a certain way and thought it was very successful. And when they come to me sometimes and say, oh, but my child is not really learning Hindi, so because we learned it this way and you're not doing it this way. And I said, okay, if you've learned it in a certain way, let's have this conversation in Hindi. If it's worked, we should be able to do that. And that's when they realize that it really didn't work. And I said, that's why we're trying to do it differently. So those are the points that I had. And I just think that the solution to this is to keep this communication between parents, teachers, students alive, and also modeling that pride, to be able to overcome that barriers. When you go to a restaurant with your child, it's okay to order in Hindi. You're not you're not labeled as anything if you're going to place that order. So I think that has to change. We as teachers in our school corridors are also exchanging ideas and thoughts in Hindi all the time, just to show them that it's all right and it's positive. This is how it should be. Yeah, that was my take on it, Camille.
Thank you. And I think Dr. Howard would agree. For the first time in many, many years, we've got DP students who talk to each other in Hindi. I've learned lots of swear words. No, I'm joking. And it's really, really nice. I've been in India 9 years. This is the first year I have students in front of me conversing in their native language, and I think that's really important. Nita, what do you think the barriers are to language learning in your experience and in your journey?
Yes, so just as Barsha said, I'd like to elaborate on, I'm one of those who thinks that exams are the worst thing that happen to a student at any time. And that is why I left the DP to go to the primary, because we didn't have exams. We don't believe in testing students in the traditional way of time tests and, proving that you have speed and things like that. I think that creates for anything so much anxiety, so much competition, which is so unnecessary. And I remember as a DP teacher, my first year always was wonderful. We had so much fun in the classroom. And then invariably in the second year of the DP, I found myself having to teach for the exam, learn these things because they will help you in the exam. And it sucked all the joy out of the classroom. The students could feel my motivation waning, and their motivation also was only to get that 7. And in fact, very often when you talk to DP students and go through that whole subject choice thing, it's always about, okay, which language should I choose? Which am I more likely to get a 7 in? It's not because, hey, I'm really keen on learning this language because it'll open up a new window to a new culture, to new people, things that I've never experienced before. And instead it is this whole race for a 7. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers.
Yes, I really agree. And I had the same experience in the DP classroom. Another barrier to learning is what we call language learning is what we call the learning plateaus. The idea that you progress, and then you stop progressing for a while. And then again, you kind of get onto the next plateau. And these plateaus, especially with teenagers, are difficult because that's when they lose motivation. Helsvin, in your opinion, how do we help students and learners, and especially teenagers, get over those learning plateaus?
Yeah, so first of all, I think you normally reach a learning plateau when you have a certain fluency, when you can express what you want, when you have reached more or less a goal that you've set yourself consciously or unconsciously. So for example, my goal when I came to India was to speak Gujarati in such a way, or Hindi in such a way, that I can converse with my family or can speak to the bajiwala and taxi drivers and things like that. So if people like that, if you have reached that level, and I have, then I realized, okay, I'm really not making much progress anymore. Maybe I learn a word here or there, maybe I learn sometimes a grammar structure, but very rarely I do. So you have to then realize, okay, this is what happened. I've reached my goal. You have to set yourself a new goal. Very often, of course, students themselves don't realize that immediately, especially when they are younger. So you as a teacher, you have to help them realize, okay, this was your goal. You have achieved it. Now, where's your next goal? Try and set yourself the next goal. You help them with setting the goal if they need that. So that is one important thing, set another goal. Another thing is that maybe you have tried different methods, or you have done your learning of a language in the same way for a long time. Sometimes it helps if you do something differently, if you change the method, if you use a different app maybe, or if you use different texts now, if you use different topics, you suddenly realize maybe, okay, now I can actually go deeper into a topic. Or you have to really look at things that you find really interesting in your normal life, in your day-to-day life. What is it that you really find interesting? And certainly in the upper secondary, that is something where the students then start learning to a different level, where they go beyond what they have been even thinking of reaching. So that is, what else could I say? I think these are the main points that I would like to take.
Thank you, Helsvin. And I think this is probably the last question before we take attendees' questions. And it's probably the million-dollar question that I'm going to ask my panelists here, who are all language specialists. How do we make language learning relevant, exciting, meaningful, and especially for languages such as Hindi, which are considered to be perhaps less exciting or less important, going back to this question of pride. Varsha, what do you think? I don't know whether my internet was a bit dodgy, so I don't know if you heard me.
Yeah, I did hear you, Camille. And I think if we have other Hindi teachers here in our attendees, then they will empathize with me, because I think Hindi is pretty challenging where creation of resources is concerned, and we still have very conservative resources, as I would say. So it really, really lies in the hands of the teacher to make that, we actually create our own resources, and also to keep in mind what is relevant to the students. So we draw a lot from, let's say, BBC Hindi, because they are actually talking and discussing issues in Hindi which are relevant to our students. Also, very often, we have parents who would come and say, yes, but Hindi literature needs to be kept alive. And we understand all of that, but we try our best to relate that to the present. And I'll give you one example. For those who know Kabir and, the Kabir's couplets, which are very essential learning where Hindi literature is concerned. But we did a journey from Kabir's Dohas to the Kabir Cafe today. And that's what made the unit interesting, because that's what they identified with. And then they wanted to explore that what was really the text. And it made it like it is something for their times. Otherwise, if you're going to just give them a sheet of dohas and say you're going to learn this and we're going to discuss the meaning of those couplets is really not going to work. So that is key. I would say that, how you're selecting your resources. We've often used, I remember doing a unit on emotions, and we have used resources from the Berkeley's music orchestra, where they have a special section just for Rahman songs. So it's not, because Bollywood is taboo for many Hindi learners, but when the same thing is done by Berkeley, then it becomes fashionable and it's all right to use that. So, kind of drawing on all of this and just getting to attract the students and show them that, language can help in these ways. We also rely a lot on service learning opportunities, and I think that works really well for MYP, the middle year students, and also the diploma program, because that's when they see the relevance of language. So, projects related to service learning in India, where they're actually out there connecting with the locals and trying to understand. And, Hindi becomes that medium of understanding them. That's when you realize the importance of language. So I think sticking to a textbook is a no-no. Resources in terms of places, stories, people, speakers, speeches by Mr. Bachchan, who is such a good orator, and showing them, what level you can take Hindi to. So that's kind of my contribution to this, and we do create a lot ourselves.
And of course that takes time, and that takes commitment, and that takes a lot of skill, because it's not actually that easy to just go on the internet, find resources. It doesn't work like this. You have to craft them, you have to gauge the level, you have to simplify text sometimes. But I think that's really what makes teaching a language successful, is to provide students with meaningful and authentic learning opportunities. So I completely agree with you, Varsha.
And Camille, if I just may add one thing that I forgot to mention, that teachers should be sharing their resources. I think there is still, teachers holding back, schools holding back. You can never really, do the same thing I do at my school in my way. So why don't we just share resources? Why don't we just, find platforms where we can pool them together and use what we need? That would be very, very helpful.
Absolutely. Maria, I know your language classes are very exciting, because I hear the children being very excited about learning German. How do you do it? Give us the recipe.
Well, absolutely agree with Varsha that choosing the right resources, providing authentic experiences that matter. And it should be the materials you teach from, or the materials you provide and open up for children should be authentic. It should be not something artificially created, because then it loses its purpose. Because at the end, the main goal is to be able to converse in a language, to be able to be a social player, so to say, in a different environment, when you go to a different language environment. And besides that, I also wanted to mention that the learning environment itself plays an important motivational role. Teachers' confidence, praise and encouragement, and a variety of different learning activities. These all aspects, they play a very important role, I think, in making lessons exciting and matching in students' interest and materials, or supporting students' sense of self-efficacy, or promoting emotional engagement in the classroom, promoting progression. All of this goes hand in hand together, I think. So can't underestimate this.
Thank you, Maria. I'd love to join one of your language classes.
Sure, you're always welcome.
All right, this is the end of the questions that we have prepared. We're going to take some of the questions that were asked in the chat. I think Dr. Howard will do some of the questions, but I would like to take the first question, because it's actually addressed to Dr. Howard, so it would be weird if he asked the question to himself. And I think that question takes the whole discussion around language learning in a slightly different direction, but one that's super important. All teachers are language teachers. It doesn't matter if you're a science teacher or a math teacher or an art teacher. We're all language teachers, especially in international schools where we may have students who are not native speakers of English. And so there's a question here from Anis, who says, Dr. Howard, for us as science teachers, any tips to help our students to remember the key words? Now, can I just say, Dr. Howard introduced everyone and said what languages they spoke. He actually speaks fluent Spanish. His French is not too shabby. I believe he speaks German as well when he decides he wants to, and obviously beautiful English and broken Hindi. So we are You're up there with all of us. You got your place.
Yeah, my Hindi is very broken, as is my German. So Anis, I think a really, really important question, as Cami said. My formative teaching years, the first 10 of them, was teaching science in fairly poor areas in the United Kingdom with children with very low levels of academic backgrounds. And as a science teacher, I might as well have been teaching a different language to the language that they spoke. And so therefore, very much making sure that you are exceptionally focused about when they need to learn and understand a term, and make sure that you recognize that what is an obvious term for you may not necessarily mean that. So in both maths and science, you learn a lot of words which have a general meaning that are in the English language or any other language for that matter, and then a very specific meaning in science, and you have to be very explicit about that. And in making sure that you don't dumb down your teaching and making sure that you use the specific words that are so important for the subject, you need to be very careful to pad it out with lots of very clear and very straightforward language. And I think one of the problems that historically science teachers did was to speak in a sort of science English that just confused kids completely. So you need to be making sure that, yeah, you have to learn this word, but at the same time you speak the rest of your English at the level that they understand, so that you're making it accessible. But yes, certainly, for example, in an IGCSE in science, you have to learn as many words or as many different uses of words with which you are already familiar as to get an IGCSE in French or German. It is quite remarkable how many English words have to be changed a bit, and I presume that that's the same if you're teaching in any other language. I've only ever taught science in English and a bit of Spanish. But, okay, so I would just like to say thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed listening to the discussion. Although I am not a language teacher, I can certainly relate to this frustration about the language being learnt for marks. Nobody becomes a science teacher because they want marks. They become a science teacher because they want to pass on their passion for this fascinating and complicated world. And some people are a bit more philosophical than me, actually want to really get the idea of understanding of the world around them and share that through an understanding of science. And likewise, language teachers don't become language teachers because they want to get marks. They want to share their passion of learning language, of communicating. And so, I think that the point that Nita made is something that is actually true for all teachers. I mean, historians want to give you a love of history. And I think that we all need to remember and hold on to that when we are teaching. And I also think that our discussion around authenticity is hugely important. Language is one of the most authentic subjects to teach. It's fair to say that when you are teaching grade 9 physics, there's quite a lot of stuff which doesn't really relate to their normal lives. And you have to be a bit clever to make your contexts authentic. Language is what we all do. We're human beings. This is what sets us apart from the octopuses. So therefore, it's obvious that a language teacher should be using real, meaningful context. And I also think I completely agree with Varsha. A good teacher is about relationships, about knowing your learners, and a gift, therefore, to language teachers, because you are using a context where you can communicate the ideas and the passions of your students. And that's something which I think is particularly good for language and literature teachers. So that's enough of me talking. I would like to ask some of these questions. From Daisy, a really interesting questions. And I think that one I'd like to aim at Camille, whether the panel feels that learning another language can positively impact on performance in other subjects. But I'm not going to ask you, is there any research on this, unless you happen to know, but if any of the other panelists have anything to chip in afterwards, I will do so. But so Cami, if you start that, and if any of the other panelists would like to add on, please do so.
Yeah, I think I've always equated learning a language to learning maths, because I always felt that grammar was your formula and words were the numbers that you plot in. And if you get the formula right, you have a sentence. And I think that in the brain, and to be fair, I mean, I can't quote research right now, but I know that it exists. There is a clear link cognitively between language learning and mathematical learning. And mathematicians tend to be very good language learners because they are able to develop the logic that you require, except for English. There's no logic to English. But in most other languages, the logic you require to be able to understand the grammar and apply it. So definitely, and I think for us as teachers, we see that our best language learners are often students who are very, very good in other subjects. There's also a lot of research around, again, cognitive brain development and linked to language learning. I've mentioned it very briefly at the beginning. There's a lot of it on the internet, but the fact that language learning develops your working memory, develops your spatial skills, develops your processing skills, develops your critical thinking skills, and develops your creativity. I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to develop too much on this, but I think the evidence suggests that learning a language is actually beneficial in many, many other ways, in many, many other areas of life.
Thank you, Cami. I actually see we've got 13 questions, so I think I'm just going to dive on through the questions. So Nita, following on from Cami's, I think, strong argument in favor of language learning as being a cognitive development process, a question has been asked from one of our mothers about how, the value of language learning for dyslexic children, which I think is almost a given, but how do you assist dyslexic children to learn language?
I think Varsha also wanted to add to that question. So, but in my experience, I think just differentiating the tasks a bit, giving them a few, scaffolding the tasks for a child who's having difficulty. I completely agree with Cami that, having a learning disability does not hamper your ability to learn a new language. Maybe you learn differently, but isn't that true of anything really? Why is it any different for languages? Varsha, maybe you'd like to add.
Yes, please.
Just from my personal experience, and I'm not a qualified, psychologist or somebody who does psychoeducational testing to be able to determine that. But I've always wondered that the test taken that determines dyslexia is probably done in English. And does that really come in the way of determining whether the student would have the same challenges in another script or language? That has been my question. And that's why as a teacher, I've never let that come in the way. And we have some very successful examples where we have a student with dyslexia. And fortunately, the IB has a lot of accommodations we can support them with, who is now learning Spanish ab initio and is sailing through the course. So that's my take on it, just from my personal experience. I don't think that it comes in the way. And like you said, if we know our learners well, we also need know how to support them well. And we can keep adapting how we teach, and the student learns to, their best, how they can succeed best. So I would say that really shouldn't come in the way. And it
Thank you very much, Vash. Very positive message. So Nita, another question that I would like you to have a go at, and perhaps hand over to Halsvind afterwards. How do you keep the joy of learning a language while meeting school and parents' expectations of achieving exceptional results? Now, this is a fellow language teacher, Nidhi, who I think many of you would share.
Well, I think when parents see that children are motivated to learn the language and are actually making an effort to speak the language, I think that would really allay any doubts they would have about your methods and your pedagogy and the approach that you're using. Halsvind?
Yeah, as I said before, I think everything that you do when you learn should be fun. It should be really something, when you do something that is fun to you, your memory is much, much better. So make the lessons fun is one thing. How do you do that? By playing games, for example, even with grown-ups, by doing things that they find interesting. Ask them, okay, what do you think about this topic? Which topic would you like to talk about? I mean, the IB offers you, for example, a great range of topics. You can ask them, okay, under under all those big topics, which topics do you like? Then you go, when you start a topic, okay, what is it that you find interesting within this topic? Obviously, as we already said, authenticity is very important. And then the other thing is that if you see as a student that you actually make progress, that you can actually say something now that you couldn't say before, that you can understand something that you couldn't understand before, that is, I think, the biggest motivation and the biggest step forward for a student. And that also ties in then obviously somehow with the exams and with the grades that parents want to see and the students want to see. If you make progress, your results will also be better. So it ties in somehow.
Yeah, I think it's very dangerous to suggest that lessons being fun means they're low challenge. I think high challenge is actually what brings pleasure to learning. So and it is strange that so many people still feel that it's got to be boring and rigid and for it to be academically rigorous and developmental. So thanks a lot, Halsman. Thank you very much. This is a question for you, Maria. From the same science teacher who says at the end of the day, when he's teaching students whose native language is different to his, should he actually be able to speak the language that they speak? Should he learn Turkish or Arabic in order to be able to teach the children, obviously in a second language situation? What do you think about that?
I think a good question by Dr. Anis, I believe, right? So I read the question and it actually made me think, is it possible to teach a concept when you don't know the local language, to teach to local children or to people of a different language some concept when you don't know their mother tongue, right? And I think it is possible, and many concepts are universal. And for some of them, language is not needed to be used. Like if we talk about science, for example, chemistry comes to my mind, and many things can be done in experiments, right? Many concepts can be explained through actually trying things out and being able to see what is happening. Besides, I think that as Kami mentioned, we all are language teachers. So we all are at the same time, when we have our subjects, we also teach a language, especially in an international school. So if you have if you know a little bit of the mother tongue, of course it is very beneficial for the learners. But I think you should not be concentrating on learning the local language till perfection before you can start teaching. I think having it as a support, it definitely is supportive to your teaching, but not as necessary as it might seem. And also skills are developed together. They complement and reinforce each other. So a science class can be at the same time a language class, right? So it can be combined. So I hope I answered your question.
I think you did a beautiful job of answering it, Maria. And whilst you were talking about it, I thought of my own experience where certainly when I was teaching native Spanish speakers, I did tend to try and drop in words, not because I was trying to teach them in Spanish, I was supposed to be teaching them in English, but nevertheless, it was another part of what Varsha was talking about, the humanizing of relationships, and the fact that I was able to explain what a spleen was in Spanish, I can't remember the word now, I hasten to add, was valuable, and it brings you a connection with your learners. So I'm not suggesting for a moment, Anis, that you should be learning Turkish and Arabic fluently, but I do think what Maria says is that we all learn together in the classroom, and to show yourself as a learner whilst your students are learning is something which is powerful, a very powerful tool. I think, Cami, do you see any other questions? I think there's some level of overlap in the questions, and I think there were some very, very fulsome answers given by all of the panelists. Do you feel that I've missed anything out, or do you think we now probably should just say good evening?
I think Nita was interested in answering a very complicated question that I had to apologize to the person who wrote it, so I'd have to do a bit of reading before I can answer this. So the question is, would you think that the Wittgenstein's lion theory and the importance of concepts and meanings should be taken more into consideration when teaching a language? I've learned something tonight and I'm going to go and do some reading because I have to shamefully admit that I didn't know what Wittgenstein's lions theory was, but fortunately Nita does. So Nita, the floor is all yours.
I thought somebody dismissed that question. I couldn't find it when I was looking back through there.
So it's in the answer question.
I know very little about it myself, but from what I understand of it is that, you know, if a lion could speak, would you still be able to understand, because the context is so different? Would the lion be able to communicate with you in a meaningful way? Because the lion's vision of the world is so different from yours. So I, in fact, added to what you wrote to Alexandra about that maybe from what I understood of the theory is that maybe that's why learning a language is so much more than just teaching the language itself, and so much more about the cultural context, learning, you know, I've always considered language as a window into another world. You learn so much about the people. You learn so much about why languages work in a particular way. And, you know, why there are certain expressions in certain languages that may not exist in another, just because they are so localized to the people who are speaking that language. So, for instance, just a very local example, an owl is considered wise in English. And in Hindi, you call a fool an ullu, which is the Hindi word for an owl. I mean, the context is completely different. And it's the same animal, but viewed so differently. So I don't know whether what I said made sense, but that was my little stab at answering your deep question. And thank you for asking us that.
Yes. Well, thank you, Nietzsche, because I certainly learned something. I understood what you were saying, definitely. And yeah, it immediately makes you think of all sorts of things. And the more different the cultures and the languages come from, then the more that must be the truth. I know friends I had in Mexico who learned Nahuatl certainly talked about that. So, has anybody got any final comments they would like to make to round us off? Okay, so thank you very much to everybody for participating. Thank you very much for the really interesting questions that were asked. Some of them a little challenging, but nevertheless, really gave us an opportunity to talk about these ideas. This video will be on this will be recorded and will be on the school Facebook page and eventually on the website. And if there is any follow-up question you'd like to get a question to any of the panelists, please do not hesitate to contact us and we will pass the questions on. So thank you once again to my fellow panelists for a really wonderful conversation. Good evening to everybody. Shabaha, Shubhatri, good Nacht.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Can't do it in Russian, I've forgotten it.
Dobry noche.
Dobry noche, obviously. Yeah. Bonne nuit.
Bonne nuit. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.